You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Hello, it's Teresa Tang. The CNA correspondent team will be taking a break for a few weeks in December, but we will be back in January 2025. We're also putting together a special Asian Tsunami Anniversary episode, which will be coming out soon. You don't want to miss that. In the meantime, we're bringing back some of the more memorable episodes from this year, just in case you've missed them. Have a listen and enjoy. What would you risk for a chance at a better life? For some, the answer is everything.
Wait, we're taking 250 people right now, okay? You're gonna be fine.
I'm Teresa Tang, and in this episode, you might hear things you've never heard before about what it's like being a migrant.
It needs to be a t-shirt, a shirt, no jackets, no hoodies, no sweatshirts, cardigans, nothing.
Last year, 2.5 million migrants entered the United States illegally via its southern border with Mexico. Nearly 40,000 of them from China. Why are these people so desperate for the American dream? Wei Du joins me today. In her new documentary, Walk the Line, she traces the same path thousands of Chinese citizens take to get to America. You want to listen to this. Wei, hi.
Hi, good morning to you, Teresa.
You know, I honestly don't know where to begin with this. This doc took you on the road for 7 weeks, and you covered a topic that strikes at the core of who we all are. Even if you haven't migrated yourself, we really all share the universal desire for opportunities for ourselves and for our children. What inspired this exploration? Can you tell me what makes it different from other stories of migration?
I think you just hit the nail on the head there. It's really about the universal desire that we see in all of us. Often documentaries are made about people in relatively extreme conditions, situations, as these migrants were when they were trying to get to America. And as you said, there's several documentaries and news reports that have been made about these Chinese migrants. They often wait for them on the U.S. border and they shout questions at them when they come across. Often what you see is when asked about why are you coming to America, they would say freedom and democracy. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's a lot of truth to that. But in our experience of making documentaries about migrants, it's a lot more complex than that. People just don't do this for a single reason. It really helps that you see these people, as your friends, as your family, as people you could relate to. You understand their motivations. And in this case, as you were saying, you understand why they want better opportunities for themselves and for their children. That's really what set us apart. We made a documentary that's about the intimate experience of being a migrant on the road, being subject to a lot of violence and danger. I hope that in the end, people see them as people they could relate to, they could see in their real lives. And I want to give you an example. So you must have seen this scene of these Chinese migrants in the desert. They've been there for a few days, and eventually when U.S. Border Patrol came to arrest them, they were taken into detention. And in detention, there are certain rules. So you cannot have shoelaces, you can only have one layer of clothing, and you cannot have anything that you could potentially use to harm yourself or other people. So the Border Patrol officers will have to give them a pat down. And then because of the workload, you could sense that they were doing it quite roughly. And I just remember when I was on a scene, I was watching that, I saw this man, he must be about my dad's age. And he was totally calm. He took off all his clothes, then put on a jacket. And as that was happening, I actually started crying. It suddenly occurred to me that they would have families too. What would have to happen for someone to go through that experience and enduring it gladly was something that got me very emotional. And that's certainly the type of emotions we were trying to evoke in our viewers too.
Yeah, I got teary so many times during your doc, and I want to talk about the emotional side of it and its toll on you later on. But I was looking at your Instagram. You posted snippets of your doc, and I was reading the comments. There was one guy, Gerald, he posted, and he said, "Look, I don't understand. China is not a bad place to be. You know, is life really so terrible there that people would just put their lives at risk to go to America?" How would you answer him?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's often the question people ask. And that actually really is the question that prompted us to do this documentary. I grew up in China, so this is a country and a people I'm very familiar with. And I just remember growing up, it is such an aspirational country that's doing better all the time, in a sense that you really couldn't foresee how good your life will be in 10 years' time. So that's the China I'm used to. It is an immensely proud population as well. What really, to me, marked a turning point was the pandemic and the zero COVID policy. What happened in the process is that it destroyed a lot of small business people. They've lost everything they built over the past 10, 20 years. And they just do not have the confidence to start over. And the majority of the people we encounter on the road are this type of people. But also on top of that, what zero COVID changed about China was the fact that there's no more visibility that the future will be better. In the past, the Chinese people could very confidently say, of course, in 5, 10 years' time, my life will be better. Of course, my children's life will be much better than I am. But because of that setback, there's a severe loss of confidence. And that is really the marginal change, right? That's prompting a lot of people to do this. Listen to what the Chinese migrants actually said to us.
3 years of the pandemic lockdown ruined everything for us. I used to have my own business but lost $28,000 in 2 years. I had to sell my apartment. I didn't even get to live in it. I have 2 kids to raise.
I had a small leather factory. In the last 4 years, we lost $125,000. There's no future. Before I lose all my money, I must get out of China.
In China, it's almost impossible to find a job at my age. I'm 56. In the US, age doesn't matter as long as you're willing to work.
Ecuador is a key location on this Journey to America way, and it's not really a country many Chinese know about. One of the many things I learned from your doc is Ecuador is actually the closest country to the U.S. that allows Chinese passport holders entry without a visa. So these migrants land there. What happens to them next?
Ecuador, strangely, seems to have a visa-free policy for the entire world. That's why it is actually the first stop for a lot of the migrants, not just the Chinese ones, the Indian migrants, African migrants. Often their journey starts in Ecuador as well. And from Ecuador, what they need to do is to get into Colombia illegally. And then from Colombia, that's the last country they will be in South America, to try to get into what's geographically considered North America. So the first country will be Panama. And then after Panama, there were the Central American states. I might not be able to recall all of them, but I think it's Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala. Yes, I'm still one short. And then from there, they get into Mexico. And from Mexico, they sort of step by step push towards the U.S. border. Now, the U.S. has a very long border with Mexico. It's more than 3,000 kilometers. There are different states people enter. In the past, there has been Arizona, Texas, but these states have been red states. They've started cracking down on illegal migration. So as we were on a trip, most of the migrants have opted to enter through California.
And the Darien Gap, it is the most dangerous portion of this migrant journey, on paper at least. It lies on the border between Panama and Colombia. It's remote, it's roadless. There's dense jungle, very difficult terrain, wild animals, and violent criminal gangs. It doesn't sound like a very nice place. How challenging is this stretch for the migrants that you followed?
The Darien Gap is really interesting. It's something I didn't know about before I started looking into this. The only reason you cannot drive from North America into South America is because of the Darien Gap. The jungle is so dense that till this day they didn't build any roads. So in the past, when the route was mostly traveled by South American migrants, they have to walk on foot for up to 7 days. Wow. There are several documentaries about that. Because it has no roads, you have no supplies, you have to carry everything on your back, your children, your backpack, all the water you need to drink along the journey. Naturally, it is a huge barrier because this area has been relatively lawless. It's controlled by one of the world's largest drug cartels. There are a lot of other dangers as well. I had a source in this documentary who doesn't want people to know who he is, but is a very senior politician in South America. He was. Have a listen to what he had to say.
There is not much presence of either Colombian or Panamanian police or any type of governmental presence because it's an area that it has always been deserted. And there are several different groups of criminal gangs that operate and they make profit out of the problem of the people that needs to travel and migrate.
Now, in Tapachula, Mexico, you managed to interview a man you call Mario. He's actually a smuggler. And the conversation you have with him is just so riveting. How did you find him?
Yeah, Mario obviously isn't someone I would naturally know, but I had a very, very good fixer in Tapachula, southern Mexico. His name is Benjamin. Just to contextualize Tapachula a bit, so usually when we go to a country, we look for a fixer in a capital, but when we reached out to people in Mexico City, they all said, we're not going there. Good luck, go find someone locally. That's the kind of town it is. Through Benjamin, we found Mario. I never really quite understood what his incentives were. Why would he come forward to reveal these secrets? Part of it is because I think Chinese migrants are still a minority of his business. So he's very keen to move into that market. That might explain why. But he was also very anxious because remember, these smugglers answer to the drug cartels. Even though they're running their own business, there are a lot of people they need to stay on the good side of. So he was reasonably anxious. He didn't really want people to know we're meeting them. His initial plan was to smuggle us into Guatemala, which we said no. Can you imagine? But eventually we found a neutral territory. He was happy with it. He turned up. We did the interview. And the interview was interrupted several times because he was so busy. People were just calling him up, negotiating price, checking where the families were, trying to figure out where to send money and all that. In an odd way, it was a good thing that happened because it gave us a bit more confidence that this guy really is a smuggler.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it was a long conversation. A lot of that content did not make into the final cut. You get the sense that he really appears to be quite proud of what he does. So I asked him, look, Mario, how are you justifying what you do for a living? Do you think you're doing God's work? And he just sort of laughed and said, oh, God's work is saying a lot. I don't think I'm doing God's work, but I'm doing an essential job. And sometimes I have to discipline people. I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, sometimes the migrants get drunk, act disorderly. I beat them up. I keep them in line, all for the benefit of the greater community. So they don't bother other people. They don't bother other migrants. And then he said, you must have heard that we rape women. We don't rape women. Women came to us to offer sex. I'm like, what do you mean? And he says a lot of times these women travel with a group of men that are not entirely friendly to them. Sometimes they want protection from their own people. And they come to us, they offer sex. We give them a separate room. We give them a little bit of protection. That's what we do. There's no way for me to verify the validity of that claim, but I just thought that left me with what was a combination of disbelief and grief that already this journey is so hard on everyone. The disproportionate effect that it has on women migrants is really unthinkable for us to be talking about this from the safety of our homes.
Chinese customers are very complicated. Firstly, because of the language. Secondly, the food. We definitely can't speak Mandarin, and they need to get used to eating beans, tacos, quesadillas, and whatever is native here to Mexico. If you hire me along the way, they won't attack you. They are not going to kidnap you. For women, they won't rape or beat them. If a man defends a woman, he may die. Our job is basically to help you reach your destination safe and sound in the shortest time possible.
A big chunk of your documentary follows a family, a mother, a father, their teen daughter, Lucy. They left such an impression on me.
Yeah.
They were put through the ringer. Their boat capsizes, then they're strip searched, they're robbed once they get to Mexico. And every time I saw you on camera meet with them, I could really feel how much you wanted to help. How did you keep your emotions separate from your job, Wei?
Well, yeah, it was such a lovely family. I still tear up whenever I think about them. The good news is they're in California. They're doing well. That's reassuring for us to know. But the help part, that's difficult because partly you want to be human with people, right? You want to be true to your feelings, and that's how you connect with the profiles. But ethically, we should not be changing the course of the story. If something happens to them, they don't make it to the US, that is not something we should try to intervene. But on top of that, the US and Mexico and Panama, I believe, and several other countries on this route makes it a criminal offense for people to help the migrants. So it is also very clear to us, for our safety, being law-abiding citizens, that we were in a situation we couldn't do that. And we had the benefit of that foresight. And when we approached people, we made it very clear to them that there are several things we cannot do for you. We cannot give you a ride in our vehicle. We cannot give you any money to get you out of a bind. Actually, I've even said to them, because they have Chinese yuan and they often want a US dollar, I said I couldn't even do that because in some instances that would be considered financing migration or money laundering.
Oh, wow.
Surprisingly, most people were very okay with it. There are several migrants that were not our main profiles, at which point said, if you don't help me, I don't want to be filmed. And then that was that. But for the main group of migrants, they were actually pretty good with having this agreement and really sticking to it. There was once after we left Mexico and the family kept getting bounced back to the south of Mexico, and that took them several tries and they wasted a lot of money. And Dad did call me and say, you know, I'm out of options. I've wasted all of my money. My family is still in Mexico. Is there anything you could do for me at all? And that was difficult, but I still had to tell them, we had this conversation early on precisely with this day in mind, and I can, because that means I break the law. They have so many good qualities, and this being one of them, is that they made an agreement and they stuck to it, and they were okay when I told them that there was nothing we could do to help them. But I suppose a lot of the people watching this would have the question is, well, then why would they want to be featured? Why would they want a camera crew following them around? Why would they do this for us? That's a question almost for every documentary that's ever made about people's intimate private lives, right? And I believe the answer is that we live to tell stories. We all have an innate desire to tell people what we're doing. Just imagine your best friend is probably the person who's willing to listen to you. And these migrants are on a journey of their life, and often they couldn't tell their family because they were worried that the family would get scared, then they'd try to get them to go back. So often they didn't tell anyone else. And we were the only people there who could listen to them without posing any threats to them. That's very, very powerful. People want to tell their stories. The important thing is we don't judge them. And they felt safe, been listened to. And I'm very glad how that worked out.
For migrants who manage to survive and they make their way through South America up to Mexico, then finally to the border with the United States, it doesn't end there. In your doc, we meet a man named Sam Schultz. And I really like this guy. You know, he leads a team that hands out free meals to migrants waiting for border control processing in Wacumba, California. I'm going to play an excerpt now of what he told you while you guys were riding in a car heading to a migrant encampment. Take a listen.
Yesterday we fed about 750 people. Most of the people that were coming from China are not really familiar with camping out, staying out in the country, dealing with the kind of harsh situation that we have here, because they seem to be mostly urban people to my reckoning. They come from a very orderly society, and as you will see in the moments here, this is not a particularly orderly situation.
Okay, so what did you see, Wei?
At the encampment, we encountered more than 50 migrants, and I think more than 50% of them were Chinese. We went at a fortunate or unfortunate time for the migrants. Is we went to Wacumba right after Thanksgiving. And because it's a long holiday, a lot of Border Patrol officers were rostered for their leave. So they really waited a long time. Some people were in the desert for 5 days before they could be taken out. So what immediately greeted us was this whole group of Chinese migrants. They all approached the vehicle because they know the vehicles were coming to feed them. I think a lot of them were were particularly excited when they saw us. They were talking about themselves. Is that person Chinese? Is this person who could understand us? That was quite a funny experience. Yeah, so he's an interesting guy. I did ask him, why do you do something like this? And his explanation is he's a Quaker. He sees the entire universe as his friends, and you must help a friend in need.
So another issue in the U.S. to contend with is public sentiment. A lot of Americans would say opening our doors to others is part of the DNA of our country. But at the same time, more and more are expressing concern about too much immigration, and they're calling for reform. It's a hugely polarizing topic right now, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. I did my master's in the U.S. I worked for a bit in the U.S. as well. And this was in late 2000s. And you could already sense how that conversation was heating up, but also how fundamentally the United States as a country has a different founding principle than most countries, especially in Asia, that a lot of the countries are organized essentially around a single ethnicity. There was a quote from Ronald Reagan that we ran at the beginning of the documentary, that anyone can come to America and become American. That philosophy has really been challenged in today's climate, in a very globalized world and also unstable world, that in a lot of countries people want a better life and they decide to pack up and leave. Is it a polarizing issue? I think that's a harder question to answer, because now there's quite a bit of consensus that something is wrong, something has to change. A country is simply not made for taking in 2.5 million strangers a year that they know nothing about. People tend to think of it as a polarizing issue, but I thought what we saw that was beautiful on the ground was how much solidarity the town of Wakamba have, even if people you would assume to be on opposite side of the issue. So, for example, the landowner whose land on which the migrants camp out, he's the most vocal critic of the current U.S. government, and he really wants something to change. He wants to re-elect Donald Trump so he could chuck all these migrants out. But at the same time, he's actually friendly with Sam. He allows Sam, because it's private property, to go on his private property to feed these migrants, to take care of them, because he says somebody's got to help these people. When we went around to do an interview and it started to rain and it's actually miserably cold in the desert, him and his wife sat down, had a cup of tea and just said, I wonder how the little ones are doing in the desert. This is unfair to them. It is a polarizing issue politically, but on a human level, people are kind. This is not an issue of kindness or cruelty. And I think that everybody realizes something is broken here and something needs to be fixed.
Then what about those folks that you followed? Say they made it to the U.S. What are their prospects for actually realizing the American dream? Are they just going to be sent back to China?
Well, as of right now, actually, they cannot be sent back to China because repatriation, it requires cooperation from the other country. And we do know that right now, China does not cooperate with the U.S. to take back these migrants. It's one of the issues in their high-level meetings that Washington and Beijing are talking about. We don't know if and when there will be any result. Essentially, what's going to happen for these Chinese migrants after they arrived in the U.S. is most of them will choose to file an asylum claim. But even if that asylum claim does not succeed, they will remain in the U.S. after the while. The U.S. government cannot just have them stay in the country and be unemployed, and they will be given a work permit to work anyway. So for the most part, unless and until they choose to voluntarily leave the United States, they will simply remain there. But that's quite different from realizing the American dream, right? What's the definition of the American dream? A house, a car, 3 kids and a dog?
Picket fence, all of that.
Picket fence, all of that. That is probably something a lot of Americans cannot achieve these days. But the reality for a lot of these migrants is a lot of them do encounter quite a bit of disappointment. As you will see, there are segments that we shot in this particular, what really is just a parking lot in Los Angeles, but it's known as a Fat Mending Square among the Chinese migrants. A lot of them arrived there. They couldn't find anywhere to live. They couldn't find reasonably stable, well-paying jobs. They hang around the square all day, chat with other migrants. What we gather from their our conversation is that some migrants do leave. They leave voluntarily to go back to China after realizing it is one big mistake.
I guess for me, the question at the end of all of this, at the end of the danger, the humiliation, as you put it in your doc, all the fear, the sacrifice, was it worth it to these people? You know, if there was someone in China considering taking this path to America, what do you want them to take away from this story?
It's difficult to give people advice, right? Because bear in mind, this is illicit activity that we shouldn't encourage people to do. On a different level, I also realize people are in situations that we might not understand, and there will always be people choosing to risk their lives to do this. At the very least, what we tried to do, and I hope on some level we succeeded in doing, is that we show them the reality of it. We show them the reality of the journey. We show them the reality of what's waiting on the other side. So they walk into this with their eyes wide open, which is not the case with most of the migrants that I encounter on the road. People had unrealistic expectations for the US and unrealistic expectations of what the journey will be. So the question of whether it's worth it really is up to the individual, what they had in mind, what they were trying to achieve, and how they adapted after they got to the US.
I was so captivated with this story from beginning to end, and I admit I got emotional quite a few times. I really encourage our listeners to watch your incredible 3-part documentary as well. Where can they see it, Wei?
It's already on YouTube. We actually dumped all 3 episodes on YouTube from Saturday, so you can find that at the CNA Insider YouTube channel as well. There will be repeats, but you can also find it on channelnewsasia.com and VOD.
You heard her. Go and watch this doc. You will not regret it. Thank you so much, Wei.
Thank you, Teresa.
And a reminder that the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. The team behind this week's episode is Rosli Pute, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, and myself, Teresa Tang. Thanks for listening.